October 27, 1944, Hill 617, Vosges Mountains, eastern France. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. In the dense pine forests of the Vosges, visibility dropped to less than 10 feet. The temperature hovered just above freezing, turning the mountain paths into rivers of mud. Somewhere in this hellscape, 275 men of the 1st Battalion, 181st Infantry Regiment, the Alamo Regiment from Texas, huddled in shallow foxholes surrounded by German forces, running out of ammunition, food, and hope. They had been trapped for 3 days, victims of a command decision that would become one of the most controversial in American military history. Now, as German artillery methodically reduced their perimeter, their only hope lay with an unlikely rescue force: Japanese. American soldiers whose own families remained imprisoned in American concentration camps. What followed over the next 6 days would become the stuff of legend. A rescue mission so costly that the rescuers suffered more casualties than the number of men they saved. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team would lose more than 800 men to save 201 trapped Texans. In doing so, they would shatter German military assumptions about American fighting capability and force America itself to confront its own prejudices. This is the story of the Lost Battalion rescue, one of the 10 most significant ground battles in U.S. Army history. According to military historians, it is a story of impossible courage, questionable command decisions, and the price of proving loyalty in blood. The crisis began on October 24, 1944, with a decision that violated basic military principles. Major General John Ernest Dahlquist, commanding the 36th Infantry Division, ordered the 1st Battalion, 141st Infantry Regiment, to advance beyond friendly lines into the densely forested Vosges Mountains. The objective: seize high ground near Bifontaine and cut German supply routes. Lieutenant Martin Higgins, the battalion's operations officer, immediately recognized the danger. The unit would be advancing without flank protection, without reserves, and without a secure supply line. The narrow logging road that served as their only connection to friendly forces could be easily cut by German forces. But Dahlquist, from his headquarters, miles behind the lines, insisted on aggressive action. By noon on October 24th, the battalion had advanced approximately 4 miles and reached their objective, a narrow ridge designated Hill 205. They established defensive positions among the pine trees and waited for the rest of the regiment to link up with them. That link-up never came. The German 19th Army under General Friedrich Wiese had been waiting for exactly this opportunity. Wehrmacht forces had deliberately withdrawn from certain positions, allowing the Americans to advance into what military strategists call a planned encirclement. Once the battalion was in position, German forces struck from 3 directions simultaneously. Elements of the German 2001st Mountain Battalion seized the high ground overlooking the American position. The 933rd Grenadier Regiment cut the supply road behind them. Additional German units sealed the remaining gaps. Within hours, the 1st Battalion was completely surrounded by an estimated 6,000 to 8,000 German troops. The German forces had spent weeks preparing defensive positions in the Vosges. They had constructed reinforced bunkers, laid thousands of mines, including wooden shoe mines invisible to metal detectors, and positioned artillery on reverse slopes where American counter-B fire couldn't reach them. Most devastating was their use of tree-burst artillery. Shells fused to explode in the forest canopy, creating lethal showers of metal fragments and wood splinters that made foxholes nearly useless. Within 24 hours of encirclement, the trapped battalion situation became critical. German forces launched probing attacks from multiple directions while maintaining constant mortar and artillery harassment. The Americans, who had expected a brief advance, carried only basic combat loads of ammunition and 3 days of rations. Water became the most critical shortage. The only source was a stream 60 yards outside the perimeter, completely exposed to German machine gun positions. Men crawled out at night, pressing themselves into the mud as tracers passed overhead, trying to fill cantons and helmets. Many didn't make it back. Attempts to resupply by air failed repeatedly. P-47 Thunderbolts from the 365th Fighter Group dropped supplies by parachute. Due in the dense forest and fog, most packages fell into German hands or were lost in the wilderness. Of numerous supply drops attempted, the trapped battalion recovered only a handful. October 26th, other elements of the 141st Infantry attempted the first rescue. They advanced less than 800 YDs before German defenses stopped them cold. The 142nd Infantry Regiment tried next, attempting to flank German positions through a neighboring valley. They walked into a minefield covered by pre-registered artillery and were forced to withdraw after suffering heavy casualties. Radio operator Erwin Blonder maintained intermittent contact with division headquarters, using the battalion's last functioning SCR 300 radio. Limited battery power meant they could only transmit twice daily. The messages grew increasingly desperate as the days passed, requesting medical supplies, ammunition, and immediate relief. On October 27th, as conventional rescue attempts continued to fail, General Dahlquist made the decision that would define his controversial legacy. He ordered the 442nd Regimental Combat Team to break through to the Lost Battalion. His exact words recorded by his aide were, "Get them out at any cost." The 442nd had just been pulled off the line after 9 days of continuous combat liberating the towns of Bayer and Bifontaine. They had suffered significant casualties and had been in reserve for only 36 hours. Not enough time to integrate replacements, repair equipment, or rest. Many soldiers still wore summer uniforms in the freezing mountain conditions. The 442nd was unique in the American military, a segregated unit composed entirely of Japanese-American soldiers, or NI second-generation Japanese Americans. While they fought in Europe, approximately 120,000 Japanese Americans, including many of their families, remained imprisoned in camps across the American West, detained without trial under Executive Order 966. The unit's motto was "Go for broke," Hawaiian pigeon slang, meaning to risk everything on one supreme effort. They'd already distinguished themselves in Italy, earning more decorations in 6 months than most units earned in years. Lieutenant Colonel Virgil Miller, commanding the 100th Infantry Battalion, attached to the 442nd, protested the order directly to Dahlquist. His men desperately needed rest and winter equipment. Dahlquist's response was blunt. American soldiers were dying and the 442nd would rescue them. At full 400 hours on October 28th, the 442nd began their advance. The plan called for the 100th Battalion toe tack on the right flank, the 2nd Battalion on the left, with the 3rd Battalion in reserve. The 502nd Field Artillery Battalion would provide support, though the forest and weather made accurate fire nearly impossible. The conditions were hellish. Rain had turned every path into mud. The Germans had spent weeks preparing interlocking fields of fire, mining approaches, and registering artillery on every possible avenue of advance. The first contact came just after dawn. Lead elements of Company E walked into an ambush. German MG-42 machine guns opened fire from concealed positions at point-blank range. Within seconds, multiple soldiers were down. The 442's response was immediate and violent. Rather than seeking cover and calling for artillery, they fixed bayonets and charged directly into the German positions. This tactic, frontal assault against fortified positions, violated American military doctrine, which emphasized firepower over maneuver. But the Nisei soldiers had learned that aggressive close combat could overcome defensive advantages. German soldiers trained to expect American forces to withdraw when faced with heavy casualties were psychologically unprepared for enemies who kept advancing despite mounting losses. Company K advancing on the opposite flank hit a minefield. The first mine took a soldier's foot off at the ankle. As medics rushed forward, more mines detonated. The company was forced to halt while engineers crawled forward on their bellies, probing foremans with bayonets. By the end of the first day, the 442nd had advanced less than a mile at tremendous cost. But they had achieved something important. They had identified the main German defensive line along a series of ridges that blocked access to the Lost Battalion. October 29th and 30th would see some of the most intense combat of World War II. The key terrain feature was Hill 617, a steep ridge that dominated all approaches to the Lost Battalion. The Germans had turned it into a fortress with 3 separate trench lines, reinforced concrete bunkers, and pre-registered artillery support. The assault began at dawn with a massive artillery barrage from the 522nd Field Artillery Battalion. Over 4,000 rounds fell on German positions in 3 hours. But the bunkers built into the reverse slope survived largely intact. When the 442nd Infantry advanced, they met withering fire. What happened next has become legendary in military history. Individual soldiers, seeing their attack stalling, performed acts of extraordinary heroism. Private Barney Hajiro, a recent replacement from Hawaii, stood up in full view of German positions and walked forward through machine gun fire. He single-handedly destroyed 2 machine gun nests and killed 2 snipers, even after being wounded in the shoulder. His actions inspired his entire company to rise and charge. On another part of the battlefield, Private George Joe Sakato led a charge that turned impending defeat into victory. When his platoon was pinned down and in danger of being overrun,